Say you make $70,000 a year. You've been saving for 20 years. You have $700,000 in your accounts. According to the most widely shared retirement rule in America, you are done. You hit the number. You are on track. But there is a question buried inside that rule that nobody explains to you, and the answer to it determines whether you actually retire comfortably or whether you spend your last decade quietly cutting back on things you never planned to cut. That question is coming, and once you hear it, you will not look at that number the same way again. There is a number that lives in the back of your mind. You might not be able to tell someone exactly where you first heard it, but it is there. It shapes what you check when you open your retirement app. It determines whether you feel okay or quietly behind. It is the reason you said, "I think I'm on track," the last time someone asked you about retirement. 10 times your salary. Have that saved by the time you retire, and you are fine. This benchmark came from Fidelity. They built it using real data, multiple market simulations, and decades of historical returns. It is not a guess pulled from thin air. It became the default retirement target for millions of people, not because it was marketed aggressively, but because it was simple, credible, and came from a firm that manages retirement accounts for tens of millions of Americans. Financial advisors repeated it. Personal finance articles ran it. Workplace retirement tools built their progress bars around it. And somewhere in the repetition, it transformed from a rough guideline into the thing you are actually supposed to hit, which is where things get complicated. Because Fidelity itself is clear about what 10 times assumes. The model requires you to start saving at 25, consistently set aside 15% of your income, including any employer match, and retire at exactly 67. And most importantly, it assumes that your savings only need to replace 45% of your pre-retirement income, because Social Security is expected to cover the rest. That 45% figure is the hinge that everything swings on. If it holds, 10 times probably works for you. If it doesn't, you are underplanning on a number you were told to trust. And for a lot of people watching this right now, that 45% assumption is not just wrong. It is dangerously wrong. Not because Fidelity made a mistake. Because the world those assumptions were built around does not match the world you are retiring into. When Fidelity designed the 10 times rule, they were modeling a specific kind of retirement. Their baseline assumes you spend less in retirement than you did while working. The assumption is that once you stop working, your expenses drop in a meaningful way. No commuting, no payroll taxes, the kids are out of the house, the mortgage is paid off. Your spending, in their model, falls to about 70% of what it was, and your savings only need to cover 45% of what your salary was because Social Security picks up the remaining gap. That is a reasonable model for a specific kind of life. And for some people, it is still accurate. The model has real gaps, though. Healthcare is the first one. According to Fidelity's own 2025 retiree healthcare cost estimate, a 65-year-old retiring today should expect to need around $172,500 in after-tax savings just for medical expenses alone over the course of retirement. That is a standalone cost that the 10 times multiplier does not automatically include. It is not folded into the number. It sits on top of it. What happens if you want to actually enjoy retirement is the second gap. Fidelity's own methodology acknowledges this directly. The 10 times target is for what they call an average lifestyle, meaning you maintain your current standard of living. If you want what they label an above-average retirement, meaning travel, the beach house, helping your kids, staying active, their own model says you need 12 times, not 10 times. That is 20% more than the number you have been tracking. The third gap is the retirement age assumption itself. The average American retires at around 62, not 67. Every year you retire early under this model changes the math in a real way. Retire at 65. And Fidelity's own guidelines say you need 12 times, not 10 times, because you are drawing Social Security at a lower rate for a longer stretch. None of this makes 10 times wrong as a starting point. It makes it incomplete as a destination. The people most at risk right now are not the ones who have ignored retirement entirely. Those people already know they have a problem. The people most at risk are the ones sitting on a number they were told is enough, never realizing that number was calculated under assumptions that may not apply to their actual life. And the time this costs you, the years you spend feeling okay when you should be adjusting, is not recoverable. There is a specific reason why smart, financially engaged people stay stuck inside a number that does not fully fit their situation. Psychologists call it motivated reasoning. It is not denial exactly. It is something more sophisticated. It is the brain selectively gathering evidence to confirm what it already wants to be true. When you hit a savings milestone, your brain does not respond by asking, "Is this milestone the right one?" It responds with relief. The anxiety that was sitting at the back of your mind quiets down. And once the anxiety is quiet, the brain loses its motivation to keep looking. You checked the box. You can stop checking. What makes this particularly tricky with the 10 times rule specifically is that the number has an institutional source. Fidelity is not some random blog. It is the firm holding your money. So the motivated reasoning gets institutional backup. You are not just believing what you want to believe. You are believing what your brokerage said. That feels like due diligence. Richard Thaler, the Nobel Prize-winning economist who helped develop the field of behavioral economics, described this pattern in the context of retirement planning specifically. People anchor to the first credible number they encounter and stop seeking information once that anchor is in place. The anchor feels like knowledge. The search for better information feels unnecessary. The result is something researchers sometimes call the on-track illusion. You are not checking your actual retirement readiness. You are checking whether you hit the milestone. Those are not the same question, but they feel identical from the inside. There is something worth naming here. The fact that your brain does this is not a character flaw. It is energy conservation. You are not lazy or irresponsible. You are human, and the brain does not have infinite bandwidth for financial anxiety. Reaching a milestone that signals safety is exactly what the brain is supposed to do with that information. The alarm shuts off and energy moves somewhere else. The problem is not your brain. The problem is that the milestone was designed for a different set of assumptions than the ones you are living inside. Let's put a real number on what happens when the 10 times assumption doesn't hold for you. Say you earn $80,000 a year. You hit $800,000 by retirement at 67. Under the 10 times model, your savings should generate about 45% of your pre-retirement income, around $36,000 a year, with Social Security covering the remaining gap to keep you at roughly your current lifestyle. Now add what the model did not build in. Healthcare costs you expect to run around $15,000 a year in out-of-pocket expenses, a conservative figure compared to Fidelity's own estimates for a single retiree. You want to travel occasionally. You want to help your adult children if they hit a hard stretch. And you are in reasonable health, meaning you may well live past the model's planning age of 93. Your real spending in retirement is not 70% of your pre-retirement income. It is closer to 85%. The gap between what your savings generates and what you actually need is real and persistent. Every year that gap exists, it draws down your principal faster than the model projected. Researchers who study portfolio depletion have a name for what happens next: sequence of returns risk. The mechanism matters. Your retirement savings does not sit in a vault. It is invested. If markets decline in the early years of your retirement, when your balance is at its peak and you are drawing from it every month, you sell more shares at lower prices to fund the same withdrawals. Those shares are gone. They do not participate in the recovery. The hole they leave compounds in reverse. Fidelity modeled this directly. In their illustration, a retiree with a $1 million portfolio drawing $50,000 a year in a scenario where negative returns come early would see that portfolio depleted in 27 years. The identical portfolio with the same average return, but with positive returns arriving first, still had over $3 million after 30 years. The starting balance, the average return, and the withdrawal rate were all identical. The only variable was the order in which the good and bad years arrived. If you retire at 67 with an underestimated spending rate and markets pull back in year 2, you are not just a little behind. You are potentially running out of money in your early 80s while you still have anywhere from 5 to 15 years left to live. According to data from the National Center for Health Statistics, a 65-year-old woman today can expect to live to around 86. A 65-year-old man to around 84. Charles Schwab's Retirement Research Center recommends planning to live even longer, to 92 for men and 94 for women, because higher earners with access to healthcare tend to live longer than the population average. This is the version of retirement that nobody talks about, not the obviously catastrophic one where you run out of money at 75. The version where you have money, but not enough, and you spend your last decade making 1,000 small adjustments that collectively add up to a different life than the one you planned. You stop traveling first, then helping the kids when they need it, then eventually stop fixing things that break and start working around them instead. You are not broke, but you are not free either. And somewhere in the back of your mind, there is a feeling you cannot quite name, which is that you did everything right and it still wasn't enough. That feeling is the real cost of following outdated advice past the point where it still applies. If this is making you think differently about that number you've been tracking, that's the whole point. Like and subscribe to stay with it because there's more of this every week. Now, the reason people find themselves in this position is not because they made bad decisions. It's because the rules changed, and nobody sent a memo. The 10 times rule was built on assumptions that were reasonable when they were written and have become progressively less accurate since. The most fundamental one is the longevity assumption. Fidelity's model plans your money through age 93. That sounds generous until you look at what the data actually shows. A study from the TIAA Institute found that only 32% of Americans correctly estimated the life expectancy of a 65-year-old. Most people dramatically underestimate how long they will live. And because they underestimate their lifespan, they underplan. Research from the Nationwide Retirement Institute put a specific number on this. Extending your retirement by just 5 years raises the risk of running out of money by 41%. 5 years. If you plan to 93 but live to 98, you have added 41% more risk to a plan that was already running on tight assumptions. The second assumption that has shifted is inflation. The 10 times model assumes moderate inflation across your retirement years. What it does not fully capture is that healthcare inflation consistently runs well above general inflation, and healthcare costs are one of your largest and least controllable expenses in retirement. Fidelity's $172,500 healthcare estimate for a single retiree is based on current projections, not worst-case ones. If you enter retirement in average health and encounter a serious medical event at 78, the number changes substantially. The third assumption is the one about Social Security. The 10 times rule works by assuming Social Security will reliably cover its portion of the gap. But the Social Security Administration itself has projected that the trust fund will face depletion in the mid-2030s, at which point incoming payroll taxes would cover roughly 80% of projected benefits. If you are in your 40s right now, you will be claiming Social Security right around the time that math becomes real. The 10 times rule does not have a contingency for a 20% reduction in one of its core inputs. None of this means you are doomed. It means the rules that made 10 times a reasonable benchmark were calibrated for conditions that are shifting in ways that all point in the same direction. Longer lives, rising healthcare costs, and government support that is less certain than it was when the benchmark was designed. And there is one more thing. The 10 times rule assumes you started saving at 25. Research from the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances shows the median retirement savings for Americans aged 55 to 64 was $185,000 as of 2023. That is not 10 times of their salary. That is closer to 2 times, which means the people who most need the 10 times rule to be accurate are the people who have the least margin for the assumptions inside it to be wrong. Remember that question from the beginning. The one that determines whether you actually retire comfortably or quietly spend your last decade adjusting. Here it is. What are the actual assumptions inside your number? Not the number Fidelity published, your number. The one that fits your specific retirement age, your actual spending in retirement, your expected healthcare costs, and a realistic longevity horizon that does not stop at the average. When you run those inputs honestly, something interesting happens. If you plan to retire at 65, not 67, Fidelity's own methodology says you need 12 times, not 10 times. That is the built-in adjustment for retiring 2 years early and drawing reduced Social Security for a longer stretch. On an $80,000 salary, that is the difference between an $800,000 target and a $960,000 target. A $160,000 gap that does not get talked about because the headline number is always 10 times. For anyone expecting to maintain their lifestyle rather than drastically cut spending in retirement, that puts you in the above-average bracket that Fidelity itself pegs at 12 times minimum. Add healthcare as a separate cost on top of your living expenses, even at the conservative end of estimates, and the portfolio is under meaningful pressure from the first year. And for anyone in their early to mid-40s right now, the compounding math on that gap is less forgiving than it looks. Every year you hold an underfunded plan because you are anchored to a number that doesn't match your situation is a year of compound interest you are not generating on the money you should have been adding. This is the opportunity cost nobody talks about. You are not just short a dollar amount. You are short that dollar amount times every year of growth it would have generated if you had started adjusting 5 years earlier. The practical reframe is this. The 10 times rule is not broken. It is a starting point that most people are treating as a finish line. The question is not whether you hit 10 times. The question is whether 10 times is the right target for your actual retirement. If you plan to retire at 67, live modestly, have Social Security in good shape, and your spending will genuinely drop after you stop working, 10 times is probably fine. If you plan to retire earlier, if you want to maintain your lifestyle, if you are factoring in health care, if you want some margin against a bad market in your first few years of drawing, and if you are planning for a retirement that lasts longer than your parents' generation expected, you are probably working toward a number that was not designed for your situation. And the time to find that out is not when you get there. Let's be clear about what this is not. This is not about scaring you. It is not about making you feel behind. The people watching this right now, the ones who hit their milestones, tracked their contributions, and followed the rules they were given, are not the problem. You did what you were supposed to do. You followed advice from a credible source and took it seriously. The problem is that rules built for a specific set of conditions start to fail quietly when those conditions change. Lives got longer. Healthcare costs kept rising. Actual retirement ages kept drifting earlier than the model assumed. And the Social Security system that the benchmark depended on came under real financial pressure. These are not personal failures. They are structural realities that arrived after the benchmark was designed. You are not broken. You are not behind because you were irresponsible. You are behind if you are because a rule built for someone with a slightly different life than yours told you that you were fine. The shift is not a complete overhaul. It is an adjustment to the inputs. Start with your actual retirement age, not the model's default of 67. Build in healthcare as a separate line item, not something absorbed into a general spending reduction. Run your spending projections at your current level first, and only reduce them if you have a specific, concrete plan for what you will actually cut. And extend your planning horizon past 93. Not because you will definitely live longer, but because planning to 97 when you live to 93 leaves you with money. Planning to 93 when you live to 97 leaves you without it. The people who retire comfortably are not the ones who hit the most popular benchmark. They are the ones who figured out their own benchmark, specific to their situation, and worked toward that with the same discipline they would have applied to any other target. You have already demonstrated that discipline. You are already doing the thing. The only question is whether the target you are working toward is the right one for your actual life. That is not a discipline problem, it is an information problem. And now you have the information,